Picture this. You're dining in the great hall of Windsor Castle in 1542. The candlelight flickers across golden plates laden with roasted peacock and honeyed fruits. The wine tastes sweeter than usual tonight, with an almost metallic undertone that makes your tongue tingle. You notice the servant who poured it watching you from the shadows, his face a mask of barely concealed anticipation. Your throat begins to burn. Not the pleasant warmth of good wine, but something sharper, more insistent. Your vision blurs at the edges. The laughter of courtiers becomes distant, echoing as if from the bottom of a well. You try to stand, but your legs buckle. As you collapse onto the rush-covered floor, your breathing becoming shallow and strained, you realize with crystalline clarity what's happening. You've been poisoned. And in Tudor England, there is no antidote, no stomach pump, no emergency room. There is only the agonizing wait for death while your murderer watches from across the room, already calculating how to claim your titles and lands. This was the reality of royal courts throughout history. Every meal could be your last. Every cup of wine might contain your doom. And the most terrifying part? The poison often came from those you trusted most. Your spouse, your children, your closest advisors. The golden age of royal poisoning wasn't really golden at all. It was a dark period spanning from ancient Rome through the Renaissance when chemistry and cruelty combined to create an art form of murder. Poison became the weapon of choice for those who lacked physical strength but possessed cunning and access. Women, in particular, found in poison a means to level the playing field in a world where men controlled armies and wielded swords. But make no mistake, men were equally skilled in this deadly craft, using it to eliminate rivals, clear paths to thrones, and silence those who knew too much. Our first story takes us to Rome in 54 A.D., to the marble halls of the imperial palace where a woman named Agrippina the Younger orchestrated one of history's most infamous poisonings. Agrippina wasn't just any Roman matron. She was the sister of Caligula, the wife of Emperor Claudius, and the mother of Nero. Power ran through her veins like the very poisons she would come to master. Agrippina's path to becoming Rome's most feared poisoner began with survival. She had watched her family members die one by one, some by blade, others by poison, many by sheer imperial whim. She learned early that in the Roman court you were either predator or prey. There was no middle ground. When she married her uncle Claudius in 49 A.D., she was already planning his death. The marriage itself was scandalous. Uncle and niece united in an incestuous union that required special dispensation from the Senate. But Agrippina didn't care about scandal. She cared about securing the throne for her son Nero, and Claudius stood in the way. The emperor already had a son, Britannicus, who was the rightful heir. Every day that Claudius lived was another day that Britannicus grew stronger, more capable of ruling, more likely to have Nero eliminated once he took power. Agrippina began her campaign subtly. She had Claudius's food taster replaced with her own man. She cultivated relationships with the palace physicians, learning which substances could mimic natural illness, which could kill quickly, and which could provide a slow, agonizing death that looked like disease. She studied the writings of Mithridates, the ancient king who had made himself immune to poisons by taking small doses daily. Knowledge was armor in the world of palace intrigue. The poison she chose for Claudius was a masterpiece of calculation. She selected a toxin derived from the death-cap mushroom, Amanita phalloides. This wasn't a random choice. The death cap was perfect for her purposes. Its effects were delayed, giving the poisoner time to establish an alibi. The symptoms mimicked common food poisoning at first, allowing the murderer to play the concerned wife. And, most importantly, by the time the real damage became apparent, it was irreversible. On October 13, 54 A.D., Agrippina struck. The sources differ on the exact method. Some say she had the poison mixed into a dish of Claudius's favorite mushrooms, a darkly ironic choice. Others claim she paid his taster, a eunuch named Halotus, to administer the fatal dose. What we know for certain is that Claudius began showing symptoms during a feast. At first, he merely seemed drunk, stumbling over his words more than usual. Claudius had always been somewhat clumsy, afflicted with what modern historians believe might have been cerebral palsy, so his initial discomfort raised no alarms. But as the hours passed, his condition worsened dramatically. Violent stomach cramps doubled him over. He was repeatedly overcome by waves of nausea, his body trying desperately to expel the poison that was already destroying his liver and kidneys from within. Agrippina played her role perfectly. She held her husband's head as he retched, called for the physicians, wept convincingly for the servants to see. But behind her tears, she was already implementing the second phase of her plan. She had Britannicus confined to his quarters, supposedly for his own protection, but really to prevent him from being proclaimed emperor while Claudius still lived. She sent messages to the Praetorian Guard, bribing them with promises of enormous donatives if they supported Nero's claim. The ancient sources provide conflicting accounts of Claudius's final hours. Tacitus suggests that the emperor showed signs of recovery, forcing Agrippina to take more drastic measures. She allegedly summoned a physician named Xenophon, who claimed he would induce therapeutic vomiting to help the emperor. Instead, Xenophon took a feather dipped in a faster-acting poison and thrust it down Claudius's throat under the pretense of helping him vomit. Within minutes, the emperor was dead. The speed with which Agrippina moved after Claudius's death reveals the meticulous planning behind the murder. Before the sun rose, Nero had been proclaimed emperor by the Praetorian Guard. By the time the Senate convened, it was already a done deal. Britannicus, the rightful heir, was pushed aside, a teenage boy with no allies and no options. Within a year, he too would be dead, poisoned at a dinner party while Nero watched. The poison worked so fast that Britannicus couldn't even cry out. He simply collapsed, his lips frothing faintly while Nero calmly explained to the horrified guests that the boy had always been epileptic. But Agrippina's story doesn't end with triumph. The woman who had poisoned her way to power would discover that her son had learned her lessons too well. Nero, paranoid and increasingly unhinged, began to see his mother as a threat. She knew too much, had too much influence, reminded him too clearly of how he had gained his throne. In 59 AD, just 5 years after she had made him emperor, Nero had his mother assassinated. He didn't use poison. That would have been too much like honoring her expertise. Instead, he had her killed and buried without ceremony. The master poisoner died by the blade, a crude end to a woman who had elevated murder to an art form. From ancient Rome, we travel forward in time to Renaissance Italy, where the Borgia family turned poisoning into a family business. The very name Borgia became synonymous with poison, and no member of this infamous clan was more feared than Lucrezia Borgia, though history has debated whether she was perpetrator or victim of this reputation. Born in 1480, Lucrezia was the daughter of Cardinal Rodrigo Borgia, who would become Pope Alexander VI, and his mistress Vanozza de Catane. From birth, she was surrounded by corruption, violence, and the casual use of murder as a political tool. The Borgia family didn't just use poison, they perfected it, developed new formulas, and turned assassination into a precise science. The Borgias' signature poison was called cantarella. The exact composition remains a mystery, but contemporary accounts suggest it was arsenic-based, possibly mixed with phosphorus and other toxic compounds. What made cantarella special wasn't just its lethality, but its versatility. The dose could be calibrated to kill immediately or to provide a slow death over weeks or months. It could be administered in food, wine, or even through poisoned gloves or letters. The oils from the victim's skin would activate the toxin. Lucrezia's role in the family poisoning enterprise remains historically contentious. Some historians argue she was an innocent pawn, used by her father and brother Cesare for political marriages and blamed for murders she didn't commit. Others point to suspicious deaths that seem to benefit her directly, suggesting she was an active participant in the family business. One of the most damning pieces of evidence against Lucrezia was the mysterious hollow ring she was said to wear. This ring, according to contemporary accounts, had a hidden compartment that could hold poison. During dinners, she could discreetly empty the contents into a guest's wine glass while embracing them or holding their hand. Whether this ring actually existed or was part of the black legend that grew around the Borgias is impossible to determine, but the fear it inspired was real. The death of Lucrezia's second husband, Alfonso of Aragon, provides a window into how the Borgias operated. Alfonso had become politically inconvenient, his alliance no longer serving the family's interests. In 1500, he was attacked on the steps of St. Peter's Basilica, suffering multiple stab wounds. He survived the initial assault and was taken to recover in the Vatican. Lucrezia nursed him devotedly, preparing all his meals herself to prevent poisoning. But the Borgias were nothing if not persistent. One day, while Lucrezia was briefly absent, Cesare Borgia entered Alfonso's room with his henchman Micheletto Corella. When Lucrezia returned, her husband was dead, found dead in his bed under suspicious circumstances. The official story was that Alfonso had been plotting against the Pope and had to be eliminated, but many believed Lucrezia had been complicit, that her absence had been deliberately timed. How could she not have known what her brother planned? The Borgia poisoning enterprise was run with businesslike efficiency. They kept detailed records of their poison's effects, noting onset times, symptoms, and efficacy. They had a network of suppliers who provided rare ingredients: white arsenic from German mines, plant toxins from the New World, exotic compounds from Arab alchemists. They employed food tasters, but these unfortunate souls were often given antidotes beforehand, creating a false sense of security for their victims. The family's most audacious poisoning attempt was allegedly against Pope Alexander VI himself, though this story might be apocryphal. In 1503, the Pope and Cesare attended a dinner at the villa of Cardinal Adriano Castellesi. The Borgias had supposedly planned to poison the wealthy cardinal and seize his fortune, but through a mix-up with the wine, both Alexander and Cesare drank from the poisoned cups. Alexander died within days, while Cesare survived but was severely weakened. Without their patriarch's protection, the Borgia Empire crumbled. Enemies they had made over years of poisoning and intimidation closed in. Cesare fled Italy and died in battle in Spain. Lucrezia, surprisingly, survived and reinvented herself as a patron of the arts in Ferrara, though the shadow of her family's reputation followed her until her death in 1519. Our journey through the dark history of royal poisonings continues in 17th-century France, at the glittering court of the Sun King, Louis XIV. Here, in the midst of unprecedented luxury and cultural achievement, a poisoning scandal erupted that would shake the foundations of French society and reveal how deeply the practice had penetrated the highest levels of aristocracy. The affair of the poisons, as it came to be known, began innocuously enough in 1677, with the arrest of a fortune-teller named Magdalene de Lagrange. Under torture, she revealed the existence of a vast network of poisoners, fortune-tellers, and providers of inheritance powders, a euphemism for poison used to speed up the transfer of family wealth. What started as a criminal investigation soon became a window into the dark underbelly of Versailles. At the center of this network was a woman named Catherine de Chaise, known as La Voisin. She operated from a house in Paris where she provided a range of services to aristocratic clients: fortune-telling, love potions, beauty treatments, and, most lucratively, poisons. Her client list read like a who's who of French nobility. Duchesses, marquises, and even members of the royal family sought her services. La Voisin's poisons were sophisticated, tailored to each client's needs. For those who wanted a quick death, she provided compounds based on arsenic or mercury. For those who preferred a slower approach, she offered succession powders, that would weaken the victim over months, making their death appear natural. She even provided love potions that were actually mild poisons designed to make the victim physically dependent on the person administering them, creating a chemical bond that mimicked passionate love. The most shocking revelation of the investigation was the involvement of Madame de Montespan, the king's own mistress. Testimony suggested that she had purchased love potions to maintain the king's affection and possibly even poisons to eliminate rivals. The idea that someone so close to the king had trafficked with poisoners sent shockwaves through the court. The investigation revealed the horrifying extent of poisoning among the French aristocracy. Wives poisoned husbands to inherit their wealth or to be free to take lovers. Children poisoned parents to accelerate their inheritance. Courtiers poisoned rivals to advance their careers. The Maréchal de Luxembourg was accused of poisoning his wife. The Duchesse de Bouillon was implicated in multiple poisoning plots. Even Marie-Anne Mancini, Duchess of Bouillon, one of the famous Mancini sisters, was called before the poisoning commission. The trials that followed were conducted by a special court called the Chambre Ardente, the burning chamber, named for the dramatic torchlight under which it conducted its proceedings. Over 3 years, the court investigated 442 accused persons, issuing 319 arrest warrants. The testimonies revealed not just poisoning, but a whole underground economy of murder, black magic, and sacrilege. The methods of poisoning described in the trials were horrifyingly creative. Some victims were killed with poisoned gloves that delivered toxins through the skin. Others died from inhaling poisoned perfumes or powders. There were accounts of poisoned candles that released toxic fumes when burned, and even poisoned Holy Communion wafers, a sacrilege that particularly horrified the devout king. La Voisin herself was burned at the stake in 1680, but not before revealing under torture the names of numerous clients. Her execution was a public spectacle, drawing enormous crowds who came to see the infamous poisoner meet her end. She maintained her innocence to the last, claiming she had only provided harmless potions and that her clients had misused them. But the most chilling aspect of the affair of the poisons was what didn't happen. As the investigation reached higher and higher into the aristocracy, eventually touching people very close to the king himself, Louis XIV abruptly shut it down. The records were sealed, many of the accused were quietly exiled rather than tried, and discussing the affair was forbidden. The king feared that further investigation would completely destroy the reputation of the French nobility and potentially implicate members of the royal family itself. From the grand palaces of France, we travel east to the mysterious and brutal court of Tsar Ivan IV of Russia, known to history as Ivan the Terrible. Here, poisoning wasn't just a tool of assassination, but an instrument of state terror, wielded by a monarch whose paranoia and cruelty knew no bounds. Ivan's obsession with poison began early in his reign and was rooted in personal trauma. His father, Vasily III, died when Ivan was 3, possibly from poison. His mother, Elena Glinskaya, died when he was 8, almost certainly poisoned by rival noble families. The young Ivan grew up surrounded by violence and betrayal, watching boyars fight for control of the regency, knowing that any meal could be his last. This childhood trauma transformed into adult paranoia. Ivan became convinced that everyone around him was a potential poisoner. He employed multiple food tasters, had his meals prepared by different cooks, and often refused to eat for days out of fear. But this same paranoia made him an enthusiastic user of poison against his enemies, real and imagined. Ivan's court physician was an English doctor named Eliseus Bomelius, who served not just as a healer but as the Tsar's personal poisoner. Bomelius was learned in both medicine and toxicology, providing Ivan with an arsenal of poisons from across Europe and Asia. Under Bomelius's guidance, Ivan's use of poison became increasingly sophisticated and cruel. The Tsar didn't just want his enemies dead, he wanted them to suffer. He commissioned poisons that would cause excruciating pain, that would drive victims mad before killing them, that would cause their bodies to decay while they were still alive. The court chronicles describe victims whose skin became severely discolored and his condition rapidly deteriorated, who experienced hallucinations so severe they reacted in extreme distress. One of Ivan's most horrific poisonings was that of Prince Ivan Shwisky. The prince had been a rival during Ivan's minority, and the Tsar never forgot the humiliation. Years later, when Shwisky was an old man, Ivan invited him to a feast. The prince was served wine laced with a slow-acting poison that caused progressive paralysis. Over the course of the meal, Shwisky gradually lost the ability to move, starting with his fingers and toes, progressing to his limbs, and finally his ability to speak. Ivan watched with satisfaction as his old enemy became trapped in his own body, fully conscious but unable to move or cry out. The prince died days later, his body completely paralyzed but his mind intact until the end. The most tragic poisoning associated with Ivan was that of his own son, also named Ivan. In 1581, during an argument, the Tsar struck his son with his staff, causing a severe head injury. But persistent rumors suggested that the younger Ivan had actually been slowly poisoned over months, and the blow may have been the final act in a longer plot. The theory was that Ivan had been poisoning his son with small doses of mercury, causing the erratic behavior that led to their fatal confrontation. Ivan's own death in 1584 was surrounded by suspicion of poisoning. His body was exhumed in the 1960s, and analysis revealed mercury levels many times higher than normal. Whether this was from medicinal use, mercury was a common treatment for various ailments, or assassination remains debated. But given the number of enemies Ivan had made through his own poisoning campaigns, it would be poetically just if he had died by the same method he had used so liberally. As we moved toward the modern era, the methods of royal poisoning became more sophisticated but no less deadly. The 18th and 19th centuries saw the rise of chemical science, which provided both new poisons and new methods of detecting them. This arms race between poisoners and investigators changed the nature of royal assassinations. One of the most mysterious potential poisonings of this era was that of Napoleon Bonaparte. The former emperor died in exile on St. Helena in 1821, officially from stomach cancer. But analysis of his hair samples in the 20th century revealed high levels of arsenic, sparking theories that he had been slowly poisoned by his British captors or even by members of his own entourage. The arsenic could have been administered in small doses over months or years, causing the gradual decline in health that Napoleon experienced. His symptoms, severe abdominal pain, weakness, and vomiting, were consistent with chronic arsenic poisoning. But they were also consistent with stomach cancer, and the arsenic might have come from medicinal treatments or even the wallpaper in his residence, which contained arsenic-based green dye. What makes Napoleon's case particularly intriguing is the political motivation for murder. He remained a threat to European stability even in exile. His escape from Elba had shown that he could still command loyalty and raise armies. Many European powers would have slept better knowing he was dead, and poison would have been the perfect method, deniable, gradual, and appearing natural. The last great era of royal poisoning came with the fall of the Russian Empire. The Romanov dynasty, which had used poison liberally against its enemies, would face poisoning attempts in its final years. The most famous was the attempted poisoning of Grigory Rasputin in 1916. Prince Felix Yusupov and his conspirators fed the mystic cakes and wine laced with massive doses of cyanide, enough to kill several men. Yet Rasputin seemed unaffected, leading to theories that he had built up immunity, or that the poison had been neutralized by the sugar in the cakes. Eventually, the conspirators had to shoot and drown him. But perhaps the most tragic poisoning associated with the Romanovs never actually happened, though they feared it constantly. During their captivity following the Russian Revolution, the imperial family lived in constant terror of being poisoned by their guards. They had their loyal servants taste all their food, examined every meal for signs of tampering, and often went hungry rather than risk eating contaminated food. The irony was that when death finally came for them in that Ekaterinburg cellar in 1918, it came not through poison, but through bullets, a far less subtle but equally final method. The legacy of royal poisoning extends far beyond the individual deaths it caused. It fundamentally changed how power operated in royal courts. The constant fear of poisoning created elaborate systems of food testing, complex dining rituals, and deep-seated paranoia that affected every aspect of royal life. Monarchs became isolated, trusting no one, seeing potential murderers in every courtier and servant. This isolation often led to poor decision-making and increased vulnerability to other forms of attack. Poisoning also had a democratizing effect on royal murder. You didn't need an army or even great physical strength to kill a king. You just needed access and the right compound. This meant that women, servants, and other traditionally powerless groups could strike at the very heart of power. The mighty could be brought low by the weak, provided the weak had knowledge and opportunity. The fear of poisoning drove advances in chemistry and medicine. Royal courts employed the best scientific minds to develop both new poisons and antidotes. The study of toxicology emerged from the needs of royal courts to understand and prevent poisoning. Some of our earliest chemical knowledge comes from investigations into royal deaths. As we examine these stories of royal poisoning, a pattern emerges that speaks to fundamental truths about power and human nature. Those who lived by poison often died by it. Agrippina, who poisoned Claudius, was murdered by the son she had placed on the throne. The Borgias, who terrorized Italy with their poisons, saw their empire crumble when they accidentally poisoned themselves. Ivan the Terrible, who used poison as an instrument of terror, likely died from poisoning himself. This pattern suggests a kind of poetic justice, but it also reveals the inherently unstable nature of power gained through murder. When assassination becomes an acceptable political tool, no one is safe, not even those who wield it most effectively. The poisoner must always fear their own methods being turned against them. They must suspect every meal, every drink, every gift. They create a world of paranoia that ultimately consumes them. The stories we've explored also reveal the human cost of royal ambition. Behind every poisoned monarch or noble was a human being who died in agony, often over hours or days of excruciating suffering. The poisons used weren't humane. They were designed to cause maximum pain and terror. Victims experienced hallucinations, paralysis, organs shutting down one by one while they remained conscious. They died knowing they had been betrayed, often by those they trusted most. Consider the final moments of Claudius, fighting for breath as his liver failed, knowing his wife had murdered him but unable to speak. Think of the young princes and princesses who died before they could even understand why someone would want to hurt them. Remember the countless servants and food tasters who died protecting or failing to protect their masters, collateral damage in games of power they had no part in playing. The gender dynamics of royal poisoning are particularly striking. In a world where women had limited political power, poison became a weapon of equality. Queens, mistresses, and noblewomen could eliminate obstacles to their ambitions without physical confrontation. This led to a particular demonization of female poisoners. They were seen as doubly transgressive, violating both laws against murder and gender expectations of feminine nurturing. But this narrative often obscures the fact that men were equally prolific poisoners. The difference was that male rulers could also use armies and executioners, so their poisonings were often forgotten among their other violent acts. When we remember only the female poisoners, we perpetuate a historical bias that paints women as uniquely treacherous while forgetting that royal courts were equal opportunity environments for murder. The end of the age of royal poisoning didn't come because monarchs became more moral or courts became less treacherous. It ended because the nature of power changed. As constitutional monarchies replaced absolute rule, as democracy spread, As the divine right of kings gave way to the consent of the governed, the incentive structures that made poisoning attractive disappeared. Why poison a king when you could simply vote them out of office? Why risk assassination when legal mechanisms existed to transfer power? Modern forensic science also made poisoning far riskier. Today's toxicology can detect trace amounts of hundreds of poisons, can determine when they were administered, and can often identify their source. The anonymous poisoning that was once so easy became almost impossible. The perfect crime was no longer perfect. But while royal poisoning in its classical form has largely ended, the human impulses that drove it remain. The desire for power, the willingness to eliminate obstacles, the capacity to dehumanize victims in pursuit of goals, these haven't disappeared. They've simply taken new forms, found new expressions in different kinds of violence and manipulation. The poison that once killed bodies now kills reputations through carefully orchestrated media campaigns. The toxins that once destroyed organs now destroy minds through disinformation and propaganda. The fear that once surrounded every royal meal now permeates digital spaces where any interaction could be a trap. Any piece of information could be weaponized. As we conclude this journey through the dark history of royal poisoning, we return to that moment we imagined at the beginning. The burning throat, the blurring vision, the terrible realization that you've been poisoned. For hundreds of historical figures, this wasn't imagination, but their final, horrifying reality. They died not in battle or from disease, but from the calculated cruelty of those who saw their death as politically expedient. Their stories serve as a reminder of what humans are capable of when power becomes more important than humanity, when political gain justifies any means, when fear and paranoia replace trust and cooperation. The royal courts where these poisonings took place were pinnacles of civilization, centers of art, culture, and learning. Yet they were also chambers of horror where every meal could be a death sentence. The victims of royal poisoning deserve to be remembered not just as political casualties, but as human beings who suffered terribly for the ambitions of others. They died in agony, betrayed by those they should have been able to trust, their final moments filled with the knowledge that someone had chosen to end their life in the cruelest way possible. Their legacy is a warning about the corrupting nature of absolute power and the importance of systems that prevent any individual from having the ability to murder with impunity. Every democratic institution, every legal protection, every check and balance in modern government exists partly because history taught us what happens when power is unchecked and murder becomes policy. The age of royal poisoning has passed, but its lessons remain relevant. In a world where new forms of power create new opportunities for abuse, where technology provides new methods of harm, where the stakes of political conflict seem ever higher, we must remember what happened when poison became politics. We must remember that behind every political assassination is a human being whose life was cut short, whose potential was destroyed, whose final moments were filled with agony. The crowned heads who fell to poison thought themselves above ordinary mortality, protected by divine right and royal blood. They learned too late that poison recognizes no titles, respects no bloodlines, and answers to no authority but chemistry. In the end, they died like anyone else who ingests a fatal dose, in pain, in fear, and ultimately, in vain. Their stories, dark as they are, illuminate a crucial truth, that power without accountability, ambition without morality, and politics without humanity lead inevitably to horror. The poisons that killed them were merely tools. The real toxin was the system that made their murders not just possible but probable, not just conceivable but inevitable. As we leave these dark chapters of history behind, we carry with us the knowledge of what humans can do to each other in the pursuit of power, but we also carry the hope that by remembering these stories, by honoring these victims, by learning these lessons, we can build a world where no one needs to fear that their next meal might be their last, where power comes not from the ability to kill, but from the ability to serve, where the only poison we need fear is the kind that corrupts souls rather than bodies. Power built on poison always ends up destroyed by it.